Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our presentation on the Beneficiary Liquidity Plan, which we like to call the final piece to your financial or estate plan. I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible. The goal for today is to educate you on a few topics when it comes to how money passes to the next generation, how we can make that more available for your family, and what kind of burden that could relieve. This subject is dear to my heart as I grew up around the funeral business in East Tennessee that my grandfather founded in 1941. And my father and my uncle continued along with myself before I got into the financial services business more than 25 years ago. I tell everybody that I'm probably the only certified financial planner, licensed funeral director in the South. I don't know if that's true or not. And everyone laughs when I say that, but it does give me a unique perspective on a topic that's not always easy to discuss. I remember several times sitting at the end of the table making arrangements for folks who hadn't planned anything at all for a funeral, and I couldn't help them very much. They would say, if Dad had only done this or Dad had only done that. Now I'm on the other end of that table, and I know what it looks like on that other end. And I'm in a much better position now to help them make things less of a burden. So what we want to talk about today is a question that I want you to consider. What is your plan for your beneficiaries to manage your final expenses when you pass away? And there's always a lot of answers to those. And we like to say, either you don't have a plan, which is what most people's circumstance is, or you have a plan that's not very efficient. So let's talk about that just a second. If you have a current plan at all, it's likely that you're counting on things like life insurance, all different types of life insurance, bank money. Maybe you have money in the bank that you've got earmarked for, paying for your final expenses. Annuities. A lot of our clients have annuities. They have some are all of these things that they have. Obviously, investments, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, those types of things that people are counting on their beneficiaries being able to access at an appropriate time to be able to pay some of those expenses, oftentimes those immediate expenses. If you have a power of attorney, a lot of people, we encourage everybody to have a power of attorney, but a power of attorney passes away or dies when the person passes away. So it's no longer valid at death. So what's common with all of these different things is that they require a death certificate, which is the big holdup with a lot of people being able to access money. If you have a prepaid funeral, I've done many of those over the years. Congratulations if you do. That's a great thing to plan. Only about 10% of the population, I believe, has a prepaid or has prepaid their funeral. But there's a lot of other expenses around that. So if you have family, children, grandchildren coming from out of town, end of life celebrations, all kinds of varieties of things and expenses that the family would incur at the time something happened to you. Obviously, more family expenses, mortgage, bills, taxes, credit cards. If you have an executor, which you likely will, they would have, and we'll talk about that in a minute, they have a lot of responsibilities and they have a lot of expenses in getting your estate settled. If you live in one part of the country and plan on being buried or cremated and moved across the country someplace, you probably know that's reasonably expensive as well. So there's additional funeral costs that go into that also. They all require someone to come up with some money at the time. So what happens when someone passes away? How long do things take? What's the delay? So usually the delay is getting a death certificate. Sometimes that's sooner than later, but oftentimes it takes 2 to 6 weeks, usually 10 business days or so, I believe is the average. That equates to about 2 to 6 weeks, or about 2 weeks. Sometimes if there are autopsies or delays with the physician, sometimes that can take quite a bit longer, and everything is pretty much stuck until that happens. So the askafuneraldirector.com, this slide shows that, again, it does take about an average of about 10 days, and it varies from state, and it varies by type of death. So those are the things that we want to try to avoid. So what also happens, of course, is that you have to pay for the funeral or the cremation. Usually there are costs like opening and closing a grave. There are different things that you need to do and pay for that are sometimes outside of the scope of even the funeral home that requires cash up front. So I always like to ask this question. This is kind of an extreme example, but so the artist Prince, a lot of people knew, passed away in 2016. And I always ask people, do you know who paid for Prince's funeral? He had an estate of about $300 million, very large estate. I believe he didn't have a will, but certainly his a little more distant relatives were going to inherit that estate. Wasn't the state of Minnesota that paid for it. It wasn't his family. They didn't have essentially any money to do that. It was his family friend and actor, George Lopez, who gave the family a $20,000 gift to pay for his funeral and also to get them to the actual funeral. I'm sure they got that worked out a little bit later, but there wasn't any liquidity in his estate at that time, which caused obviously some delay and some burden. So the executor that you would need, and obviously you probably, if you do have a will and you've planned that out, you probably have selected an executor to handle things. But there's a lot of responsibilities there, and we'll cover just a couple of those. But most estates take between 6 and 48 months to complete. 48 months is a long time, 4 years. Most of those can be settled certainly much sooner than that. Again, the responsibilities of the executor are quite a few things, and I won't cover all of these. I'll just as a brief review, but find documents. They sometimes will hire an attorney to help keep up with everything. They have to apply for probate. They often have to put a notice in the newspaper and run it for 6 months. I believe that's that way in Tennessee. Still notifying interested parties and let them know. Manage your property if you have rental properties and all kinds of different things. If you have a business, they would need to continue to help with that. Pay valid claims by creditors. File tax returns. The list keeps going, right? So distribute assets to beneficiaries, right? Everyone's familiar with that one. They must keep accurate records, and they have to file a final accounting with the court. So there's a lot of responsibilities, and clients call us all the time, and of course we refer them to other attorneys to help with that. But that's a big responsibility. And then finally, after that's settled, the inheritance is then transferred to those beneficiaries that are appropriate. So the time that takes, of course, varies. What are some of the expenses that are involved? So a lot of these you'll, of course, know about. The first one probably is going to be the funeral expenses, and then any other expenses that we talked about that the family would incur in the first few months or first few weeks. If you're looking at funeral cost, for instance, the average funeral cost in 2015, a study by the National Funeral Directors Association, which I'm very familiar with, said that the average funeral cost in America is about $15,000. Now, cremation is becoming much more popular, a less expensive option. A lot of people are opting for that. But about 5 years ago or so, that was the average. I'm sure that's gone up now for a traditional funeral. Family expenses will be the next one, right? So if people are coming from out of town, flights and hotels, different expenses that you would have, for your property. That would still need to be maintained. And then expenses, as we mentioned, for the executor. Those expenses typically are around $10,000, right? So the question would be, how would you give, and this is the important question, how would you give immediate access to money for your family to manage your final expenses, right? That's a very important question. And what we're talking about today is the Beneficiary Liquidity Plan. It's a way to give your family access to money that you were going to leave to them anyway in a more timely manner so they can manage those expenses at the time that they need them. So you're using money you're already going to leave to those beneficiaries. Planning ahead using the Beneficiary Liquidity Plan doesn't give them any more inheritance or any less. It simply provides them access to your predetermined dollar amount within 24 to 48 hours of your passing. So this is a very simple process. The biggest thing that I think it helps and that I have seen is that having some sort of plan around this subject relieves the burden by allowing them access to money that they're going to eventually inherit anyway. The elimination of the death certificate requirement gives them access to that money 30 to 60 days faster. And that's the real benefit here. That's how this really, I would say the secret sauce is eliminating the death benefit, or excuse me, the death certificate requirement. And again, we feel like this is truly the final piece to the estate plan. So to fund it, essentially, you're using money you already have. You don't have to come up with any additional funds. Maybe it's funds that are in the bank, they're in a savings account, in a checking account, or whatever else. You don't have to come up with anything additional to do this. You can allocate up between $2,500 and $15,000 in the plan. Funds grow tax deferred and pass tax free to your beneficiaries. The death benefit is paid out within 24 to 48 hours without a death certificate, except in the states, as you can see below there, in Indiana, Kentucky, Louisiana, Massachusetts, and New York. It doesn't work there, but in all the other states at this point, it does. The great news is everyone that's age 99 or younger is eligible regardless of health. Again, you're not increasing your estate or decreasing it. You're just using money you already have. And it's very easy to set up. It's very simple. Takes probably 15 minutes to do that. You can get your plan documents, obviously, by mail very quickly, typically within a week. So how and why it works. Again, you're going to be using money that you already have that maybe are sitting in a savings account or inside of an existing life insurance policy, a CD, or really any other type of investment that you might have earmarked for your family to use for your benefit. Again, allocating a portion of the inheritance that you're already leaving. And here's how this is done, actually. So it's protected with a whole life insurance policy and plus a free irrevocable trust. So the life insurance policy is not like a life insurance policy that you're buying more insurance. You're really not doing that here. It's paying a modest amount of interest. Currently, that's about 1%. I believe, and so it's essentially just holding the money. It grows pretty slowly, but the benefit is, I believe, is the free irrevocable trust that allows those funds to be accessed without a death certificate. So again, the money is available within 48 hours. Your beneficiary can take the claim form to any funeral home or crematory anywhere. The money will be good there as it's in that certificate. And here's an example. So if anything were to happen, to have that money pretty much in a very short period of time, the beneficiary would just need, or the executor would just need to take the claim form to the funeral home, right, or crematory or cemetery, wherever that may be. And at that point, the funeral director, if let's say the bill was $10,000, this is a $15,000 example. If the bill was $10,000, the funeral director would give you a bill of goods and services provided. They would sign off on that to get that taken care of. The executor or whoever were making the funeral arrangements would sign the form as well, accepting that. And then if there were any other monies left over, in this case, let's say $5,000, the beneficiary would get that money directly. Most of that money would possibly go to completely to the funeral home or for the final expenses. But if there were money left over, the beneficiary would get that money essentially again within a couple of business days. So it's very, very simple and easy to put in place. So setting something up like this, we've been doing this with our clients now. Setting something up is very simple. You can do it with a phone call, almost a video conference, something that's very easy, or of course we can certainly do it in person. But what we would do is, of course, help you determine the minimum amount. We don't want to use a maximum amount here. We just want a minimum amount that your family might need after your passing. That's really all we're trying to do with this. So, and we, of course, help determine which part or where the money would come from to fund. Most people have funds like that set aside already in something, but they don't realize that they can't get access to those funds without some help. And of course, we would answer the questions about the final process. You can complete the plan over the phone or in person. Most people come into the office to do that just very briefly. But again, it's very simple to do. The main thing I think is that we'll ensure, as it says here, you will ensure that the legacy you leave behind is one of composure and compassion. So it just makes it much simpler. It makes the burden much less profound if you're doing some sort of planning like that. So final thoughts would be with this beneficiary liquidity plan, you know, our goal really is to make it easy for your family on one of the most difficult days of their lives, which is of course the day you pass away, using money you'd already earmarked or planned for leaving them as an inheritance. And we simply make sure that you've got access to that money within 24 to 48 hours of your passing, making it really easy for them. It's not about leaving them more money or leaving them less money. It's about making sure they have access to the money where it's not a burden for them. So I really appreciate your time today. I hope you found some of this information to be beneficial, and we look forward to helping you decide whether a beneficiary liquidity plan makes sense for you and your family. Call us if you have any questions at all, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thanks very much.